Where'd you go, Bernadette? Wondering who tells the story. Part 1. Who and why? The nature of narratives interests me. I wonder why a story gets told, as well as wondering why a story gets told the way it does. Narratives have multiple layers that most people pay no mind. Narratives serve multiple purposes. On one hand, they deliver information. On the other, they manipulate emotions. Fictional stories, that is, stories about fictional people, can move us to tears, which may seem weird when you remember that you have no real attachment to fictional people. When it comes to nonfiction or nonfiction adjacent works, details matter. A person could write just the details. They could focus and speculate on certain details to try to enhance one section. They can maneuver details to create a better, more interesting story. For an example of this, look at any movie based off real events or any biopic. It seems that any time a historical film releases, critics quickly spotlight the factual errors and the disregarded details. The reasons, the surplus of material used for discussion, never runs dry. Most people have no reason to question narratives. They search for entertainment, and when they find it, they enjoy it. No reason to dig further. I cannot blame people for taking this approach. Sometimes I receive eye rolls from friends and family when I begin a lecture about how a narrative works. Those who give eye rolls will then shake their heads and leave when I start dissecting semantics on a sentence-by-sentence level. Once, while one of my brothers and I discussed the more subtle details and the cultural implications of a novel, my other brother chimed in, declaring that the discussion did not matter because it was just a book. At the time, I felt annoyed, but, as I stated earlier, I understand. Some people do not want the illusory screen removed. Some people especially do not want someone else to indicate the screen before trying to remove it. People just want to enjoy the experience. Hearing someone explain to you why you like something can come off as pretentious. When I read material for study, I wonder who tells the story and why they tell it the way that they tell it. I wonder why the narrative uses the words it uses. I wonder if a different or better way exists to convey the same information. Then I begin speculating at what the words mean and what they could mean. This thinking expands in both directions like a line starting from a singular point. I consider the final product, the narrative, as well as its creation. Not every instance that draws my analytical scope becomes a matter of theme or characterization or symbolism. Sometimes I focus on craft. A narrative needs to be created, and I like to speculate about form, function, and technique. Where'd You Go, Bernadette offers some interesting conundrums when it comes to its narrative. For the most part, when I read the novel, I read it for pure enjoyment. I did not worry about the narrative or with its construction. I enjoyed the book enough that I also did not have to occupy myself with speculation. With novels that I do not enjoy, I find myself examining the text more than I would with a novel I did enjoy. When I hit a bad paragraph or sentence in a bad novel, I find myself stopping and mentally ordering complaints against the offending paragraph or sentence. At first, I let Bernadette wash over me like a natural phenomenon. However, the more I talked about the novel, I learned that I wanted to talk about it more and more. I've decided to analyze it on a narrative level, meaning on the level at which it exchanges information. Deeper analysis will grow from that. For full disclosure, I have read a selection of material related to narratology, but I think this selection of my library runs thinner than it should. I would like to expand it. With a mixture of fortune and misfortune, other material has kept me busy. As a result, I admit my shortcomings when it comes to narratology. I may not know all of the jargon, and I may use some terms incorrectly. In order to avoid problems, when I use a term, I will try to define that term. Those who have more history with narratology may laugh at my ignorance, while those with less may stumble into confusion. Part 2. The structure. Bernadette tells itself through the familiar epistolary form. A collection of news clippings, emails, memos, and take-home flyers comprise the narrative. Anybody with a healthy history of reading should recognize this form. My first experience, as far as I remember, came in the form of Nothing But the Truth by Avi, which I read for my 6th grade class. This novel detailed a social-political aftermath when a student violates his school's rule. Through a collection of relevant sources, the novel pierced together how the mindset of people outside of the main cast of characters formed. One chapter that stood out to me, to the point that I remember it well, consisted of a morning radio show. I disliked the book. I have not reread it since, and I probably will not. The way adults took the word of a child without further questioning annoyed me. Other classmates declared their dislike in class, and the teacher agreed. She said she thought the book appealed to a younger demographic, especially with the humor. At the time, I did not clue in on the possibility of the ignorant bureaucratic practices lingering within the subtext of her words. Also, at the time, I did not wonder about the structure of the novel's narrative. I did not wonder why a presumably recorded transcript of a radio show appeared next to diary entries. Dracula has diffused enough through our popular culture that it might stand as the most famous example of the epistolary novel. However, it also suffers from its diffusion in popular culture. Although recognition of Dracula and some of the principles it established for vampires runs high, a great percentage of the population has not read the novel. Of course, I do not have hard data on the matter. As such, I rely on personal anecdote. Either way, from my casual observance, the general knowledge of Dracula comes from film adaptations and parodies. Someone could gain a good understanding of the novel, such as characters, setting, and themes, by ingesting material other than the novel. On a side note, I find this phenomenon fascinating. Because of this phenomenon, though, people do not realize the epistolary nature of the novel. Regardless of some hypothetical person's knowledge, a collection of diary entries, medical files, and newspaper clippings compose the novel. These give a vague sense as to the real nature of the Transylvanian Count. The reader always views the character of Dracula indirectly through another character, sometimes one completely ignorant of Dracula's importance to the story. Much like with Nothing But the Truth, I did not dwell on the compiling of these snippets. With the increase in technology, the epistolary format changed. Now, authors can access all manner of media for their epistolary novel. A recent acquisition of mine told its story through a series of online reviews for hotels. This gimmick sounds better than its execution, but that line of discussion will take a life of its own. This greater proliferation of communication in our modern lives may have led me to my current state of consideration. My state may have arisen from a serious, if amateurish, dive into narratology. Either way, I sometimes wonder who tells the narrative and why they tell it. As stated earlier, a collection of epistles form the narrative of Bernadette. The reader gains insight and dramatic irony from the information presented. A memo makes the reader privy to information that another character desperately needs, but, to the reader's excitement, will never have. Although I have reservations about the epistolary form, I believe Bernadette managed it well, and I believe the story could only be told in this form. During my reading, I did not question the compiling of the data until I reached the end. The novel, through B, reveals that B had compiled all of the information, all the memos and flyers and emails. After receiving half of the information, she took it upon herself to finish the collection. She does this for general understanding for the purposes of solving a mystery. Therefore, although compiled of multiple and various voices, B tells the story. She created the narrative. We have a who, B, and a why, personal elucidation. Both of my questions have been answered. However, I run into a new problem. Part 3. Is it better to not know? An engineer might discover a problem and then might desire to address this problem. This engineer could speculate and plan, and after some time devise a machine. Not knowing if the machine works, the engineer turns it on and nothing happens. One might scrap the machine altogether and restart from scratch, re-examining the original problem. Another might examine the machine to understand why it did not work. Maybe it did not work because the engineer misdiagnosed the problem. Maybe the original problem sprouted from a series of problems. While the machine addressed a symptom disguised as the cause, the real root cause remained unchallenged. In this hypothetical situation, the machine could in turn grow a new branch of problems. Replace problem with story and replace engineer with author. I admit the metaphor contains faults, as with most platitudes, but it comes close enough to my point. Where'd you go, Bernadette answers my two questions, but as a result, I have to consider the existence of a third question. The answer and the answer's value changes depending on circumstances. Bernadette contains some great comedic timing. A good portion of the humor comes from the structure. The novel increases the worth of a funny line or situation by placing it within proximity to another complementary scene or line. The epistolary format helps with this since the reader can move among separate instances that would remain unknown to the characters. The novel has more leeway when it comes to manipulating chronology and the general flow of information. If told in any other manner, the novel would lose some value. However, the strengths of the novel causes, within me, doubt about the answers to who and why. If B, a 15-year-old student, compiled this information, then she possesses some of the greatest comedic timing. She cannot take credit for the material she did not create, but she can take credit for placing the material in an order that would elicit the greatest reaction. She understands both the overt text of the material as well as the subtext. The narrative moves in a general linear fashion with the flow of time, while sometimes deterring for comedic or emotional effect. Correspondences between Bernadette and a remote personal assistant who turns out to be part of an international scam appear routinely through the narrative. B, the compiler of data rather than the character within the data, could have placed these correspondences together. They could have occupied their own section or appendix. She, assuming the autonomy of fictional people, made the conscious decision of placing these correspondences in their current spot. B may have known to place relevant information, such as important pieces of character backstory, together to create the narrative. B may have also just got lucky. Now that I know the who and the why, I must wonder if it makes sense. I must wonder whether or not I believe that B would construct the narrative in this way. This might appear as nitpicking to some audiences. The final product should hold the final say. The summation of all the parts rather than an individual part should matter most. To counter this, I posit naysayers to think of a movie or a TV show in which characters watch security camera footage of a past event. This situation occurs often enough, and, often enough, the camera through which the character watches acts like a movie or TV show camera. It displays angles and shots that a security camera could not. The audience has plenty of authority to question the nature of the fictional camera within a fictional world behaving like a self-aware camera. This takes the audience out of the experience. It breaks the illusion that the source material, although artificial, shows something real. If you question this quality, consider rescue scenario simulators. Those in the simulations must act as though the simulation is real. Having B compile the narrative of Bernadette did take me out of the experience. The same applies whenever a movie shows security footage that has the eye of a director. I can reason with myself that B could compile the narrative with skill. The novel establishes her artistic sense and her intelligence. She could have done it. Still, I was her age, and I knew all manner of smart and artistic people at that age, and I doubt they could have done the same. Bernadette also makes me question the nature of my original problem. I used to wonder, when it comes to epistolary novels, who constructed the narrative? Now, I wonder if that even matters. Worrying over a small problem led me to a more abstract problem. I may never arrive at a solid answer. I may never arrive at an adequate answer. But I like that. Not having an answer means I need to read more, means I need to ingest. I may never arrive at a solid answer. I may never arrive at an adequate answer. But I like that. Not having an answer means I need to read more, means I need to ingest more. Maybe, in time, I will have my answer. Maybe the answer will lie on a path previously undiscovered. This has been Bennett Durkin, and this has been an essay from my library.